M. The Media Project.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are here for another SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast. Your host, that is yours truly, Scott M. Graves, here in the remote, wild, exotic studio here in the wilds of Vermont, USA. I'm joined for this very special Are We Here Yet with my sometime co-host on the Innovato2 podcast, Mr. Ryan Munn.
Hello, good to be here.
And tonight we are joined by our guest, Matt Schneider. He is founder of a company called Building Inc. What I find interesting about Matt and about this company, and I'm hoping that we have all kinds of great ways for this conversation to go tonight, is the intersection that his company has between the real estate markets, some financial insights, the services they provide in and out of that marketplace, and also just the way they intersect not only with developers of real estate, but the developers of tech. And so there's a whole bunch of different ways that this conversation can go tonight. And we're excited to have you here, Matt. First of all, welcome to the Are We Here Yet podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Ryan, it's good to see you again. We had first met at Boston Blockchain Week now almost half a year ago. And Scott, we had been connected because of Ryan. And I think this is going to be a great conversation because, like you said, there's a lot of intersections between investment banking, construction, real estate, technology. And this opens up super niche and inquisitive conversations for sure.
So tell me something, right? How does one get to provide service at the intersection of all these things, okay? For people who are particularly maybe, and this isn't a put down, but linear thinkers, right? People who think sort of in a straight line perspective wise. This sounds complicated at first. I'm also further interested in not just the how, but the why. How did you get into wanting to provide service at the intersection of so many important things that we know in reality are highly interrelated?
Well, I would say it actually was a bit linear, the journey getting here. I didn't set out to tackle all of these different industries, which ultimately they are. You start talking about construction and you get involved in supply chain and procurement, and that's just different than syndication and raising money and all the other things that I'm involved with. So it was sort of linear where we added one thing onto the other year after year. But that's really what it was the result of. Years of talking to people, experimenting, figuring out what worked, researching, and then all of this just accumulated over time. And it's been quite the responsibility to learn everything. And I'm actually quite glad that I didn't go to college, which is sort of the beginning of my why into why I'm here and why I've started building. But I'm glad that I didn't pigeonhole myself into one degree or area of expertise because it's been required of me to learn so many different things. And as soon as you learn it, it changes. What the industry thinks shifts every week at this point, and you just have to be super cunning and adaptive. So if we circle back to around 2020, this is when I was failing as a day trader. I made some money and I lost some money, and I was kind of stuck in that cycle for a while. It taught me a lot about capital markets, and it's come full circle. I understand liquidity and price discovery and the bidding process a lot better, and that's laid the foundation for how I treat tokenized assets, understanding what buyers and sellers are actually thinking about in a transaction and not just hoping technology solves it. But I was a mediocre trader, as most young people are. There's a lot of psychology that goes into it. And if you pick up trading, it's because you're trying to make money fast, to be honest. And so that's what I was trying to do. And I had this reality, come to reality moment, which was that this wasn't sustainable. So I got exposed to commercial real estate and just how mature and large scale the industry was, how much capital there really is. And it shifted my worldview. Like most people drive through cities and they're not looking at these skyscrapers thinking, wow, that's $500 million sitting right there. And people are using that as collateral or hedging, invested into that building to hedge against inflation. Like they're not running the numbers or thinking about the complexity or the financialization of these buildings. They just exist. So seeing the inner workings of these properties and not just thinking of them as a place to live, work, or play, but the underlying investment side of things just shattered my worldview. And it's like, wow, our skylines aren't here to look pretty. They're here to make money. And I just started exploring all the different avenues that I could get involved in the industry. And one of those, the first area that I landed on was getting more capital flowing into projects that needed to be built, whether that was a new apartment building or an office building or redeveloping homes. There's always a need for capital. And so my first initiative was setting up a marketplace to syndicate commercial real estate deals. And it was at that time that maybe by luck, coincidence, that tokenization was starting to be talked about. And like many naive entrepreneurs, I thought, wow, we could tokenize all the investments and then the money will show up faster, right? Because that somehow made sense at the time.
It's just so easy.
Yeah, right. And I guess there's some logic to it. Maybe there's more liquidity, although I really put my foot down on that claim. Or maybe there's more accessibility, or it's easier to navigate securities regulations, access more investors. So we started, myself and my co-founder at the time started building a marketplace to do that. And we quickly learned, and this was my first exposure to how many intersections I had just walked into, because we started seeing all the smart contract standards that were emerging, the requirements for decentralized finance and the relationships that you need with exchanges and liquidity pools and institutional capital, and how fast or slow they're moving on chain so that they can actually make these transactions and the costs that they're going to.
And you're experiencing this, by the way. You're not just describing what you guys experienced for the first time entering a market, but the actual changes that were going on in the market 4 or 5 years ago, right? Because there was a lot of rapid shift at that time.
Right. I mean, we were at the forefront, building a platform, seeing the changes, trying to adapt to that. And the reality is that as a small startup, you have limited resources, and the changing industries require more resources than what we were confined to, because you're always changing your product, or you have to market more, you need more market exposure. And the marketplace model in general is really challenging because you need to fulfill both sides. I convinced myself, if we do it right, we could have a network effect, and then everything's going to take off and we're going to be a household name for real estate investments. But I think that was very ambitious. I still think that, what we're working on could become a household name, partly because I chose the most basic, simple word for a company, where I think anyone can talk about building. But we really underestimated how much money would have to be poured into that. And we were trying to raise capital, and there were marketplaces flopping left and right. I always say there was a graveyard of tokenized real estate projects where people put $1 million into a platform. They tried to raise capital. They didn't attract investors. They burn out. Flame burns out. And this was, it was another reality check for us.
Dig into that. Is that simply because typical real estate investors are, enamored with the built environment, right? Otherwise, their money wouldn't be in real estate. Was it an issue of culture? What I mean by that is tokenizing their money was exotic to people, and so wasn't, the build out of the marketplace wasn't fast enough because you couldn't find enough people to buy into that idea? Or was there something else, uh, uh, happening there that slowed things down?
It was the lack of demand. The supply side was easy. We were very capable of relaying to real estate developers that after they onboarded to this platform, they could tokenize their capital stack, and then we would work with them to find investors. And it was that part of the business model that fell short. We had more pipeline than we knew what to do with, because if you tell people you're going to help them raise money, they sign up.
Yeah.
Right away.
Yeah.
So it wasn't hard getting a pipeline or customers, but then you had to find investors, and we were really leaning into the crowdfund model. Now I have very mixed feelings. I think it's great to democratize investments, but I think that's just something you offer on the side, and then you still say we're going to complete this round with institutional capital, because the sheer number of investors that you need to raise $10 million equity is incredible.
It's hard, isn't it? Like, I'm like you. I really believe in the democratization of investment, especially around real estate. I think, but it's easier said than done, isn't it? First of all, and the builders and developers listening, well, it'll resonate with them. I mean, generally you're going to spend, regardless of the platform, the venue, if you will, for finding investors, you're going to spend just as much time with the person that gives you $20,000 or $50,000 as you are the person that gives you $500,000 or $1 million. Except there's a lot more overall aggregate work to do with the 20,000 and the 50,000, and also there's all kinds of other issues, right? Where you do your best with accredited investors, and yet people who are giving you those small amounts of money are often, even though they might sign paperwork that says otherwise, they're using some of the last money they have. They really shouldn't be using their money on anything that has any level of risk. And you just don't want to do that. You know what I mean? I think most people that are seeking investors, they want to work with the right kind of relationships, right? They're not seeking to hose anybody out of their money. It's easier said than done, isn't it? The sort of crowdfunding model, right? Because of these issues.
Yeah, now generally I abstain from it, and I don't even talk about fractionalization. The first reason is that blockchain doesn't fractionalize ownership. Anyone who has set up an LLC or a C Corp knows you can slice and dice it as many times as you want and give that to people. Then you could even use software like Carta if it's a startup, or Agora if it's real estate for digital cap table, and no blockchain is involved at any point. So I really pivoted away from fractionalization or democratization, not because I wanted to follow the money, which is sitting in institutional use cases, but because it was a nearly impossible business model. Now, there's companies out there like Equity Multiple or CrowdStreet or platforms like that have succeeded in building a nice investor base, and you can sign on and you can find alternatives and you can invest in those. There's quite a lot of capital that has gone into that, and years of growing those platforms, and then the relationships that they needed in order to pull that off. I mean, you have to really be partnered with everyone in order to get access to their investor base, their CRMs, and or their wealth managers who are each managing dozens and dozens of people, and then feeding the deals to them that way. And at the time, I mean, I was a first-time founder, and I barely had a LinkedIn page. So for me to go out and try to network with people, it was very difficult. I really chose a business model that was not going to be successful, as ambitious as it was. So I decided to pivot, and we've pivoted multiple times. We were talking before the show started that I'm always changing our approach to something, which I have no shame in doing, because any good startup is going to do that. That is the whole point of being a startup. You are young and agile. You need to be able to move. And I can dodge the punches and roll with everything in a way that the larger companies can't. And so we've adjusted our business model, our clientele, our deliverables, and how we want to charge people, what the pricing is. We do this all the time, but obviously the major shift was going from a marketplace to software, where I said, okay, clearly there are people who are better at raising capital than I. This young, ambitious founder, just a young buck. When there's banks and institutions and family offices and massive 100-year-old businesses that exist for doing exactly that, I'm not going to overhaul the system. But what I can do is I can roll out software that supports that. We can build a startup around that, find our niche, find the pain point in that exists, and then start to solve that. And people will pay for it if we bring it to them and they deem it pertinent enough to invest into it. And that has been our story so far.
Ryan, would you agree with me? Like, Matt is a walking, talking accelerator in the making. If we could take everything that we just talked about in the last 10 minutes as an exercise, as an example to illustrate this is the iterative process for starting your company, right? That you have to go through, and the problem solving, the recognition of these complex systems and how you insert yourself in them. Bravo, man.
Well, it's a hard one, right?
Yeah.
You don't figure it out right away. You figure it out when you don't get capital or you don't get customers, and it's been year after year and you're just trudging along. And then that makes you realize, I got to do something different. I really need to listen to my customer. I need to ask them, what are you going to pay for? What can I bring to you that you're going to buy, instead of me trying to guess? And they'll tell you, they'll say, well, this has been a major problem. We're putting money into this. We're putting time into it. And we happen to have the foundation to solve that. We have, sometimes you don't always build out the solution. We say, okay, we're going to work on this. We're going to give you a really good platform. And then you turn around, you present it to them, and they say, this is great. We're going to pay $500 a month for it. And you start to scale it that way. Because if there's one, there's obviously going to be many with many people or firms with a similar problem. And that's the whole Tam Sam Sam. How many people probably have this problem out there? And I always avoid that because you can fudge the numbers super easily and it's hard to say, but doing a brief analysis of what the market looks like and how many people you could potentially approach. I mean, honestly, this is how one of the largest driving factors for building and what made us unique. I said, we got to go after the mid-market real estate developers who really want to grow and can't hire another person. So what are they going to do? They're going to buy technology that replicates the responsibilities of another person, and they're going to save a lot of money that way, and then they're going to scale. And every time they scale, they add another property, another development. Then this is another stream of income for us. We tighten the relationship. It adds stickiness because properties are complex, and we're putting that complexity on our platform and simplifying it. And for them to log off and take it somewhere else would just unravel that and create spaghetti. So looking at a unique position in the market has been surprisingly one of our massive unique identifying factors.
And how has it been actually marketing to that group? Because I have to say, we've done that in the recent past. We're developers, but at the same time, my company also provides service to other developers. And it's tricky, right? You need somebody large enough to recognize that if they have to be interested in really scaling, right? And then they have to be interested in the notion that, like, I need to invest the right kind of time and money in the right places to get that scale, right? And not be so small. So if they're of a certain size, they don't need me. If they're too small, they're usually small because even if they say they really want to scale the company, they're doing none of the right things management wise. They're doing none of the right things, resource allocation in general, personnel, whatever, to really make that happen. Right. And what I found in the building trades is that's and developers, that's usually an overzealous leader, right, who just can't give up micromanaging absolutely everything. And even though he or she will complain, oh man, I'm just driving from place to place. There's just not enough hours in the day. And they'll have a team of, 5 to 12 people around them that are just shaking their head going, what do you want me to do? Right. It's like, this is a tricky segment, right? How has it been for you is what I'm asking.
Yeah, well, I would agree that it's a little bit of a tricky segment because you're well, for the reasons that you described, they could be too small where they don't have a growth issue or an interest in doing so. Or perhaps they're just structured completely wrong, and that's the reason they weren't scaling. It's not because they didn't have the right technology or the right expertise. It's because it's a total mess. And this really describes a lot of the mid-market real estate developers, which happens to be where most of our real estate comes from. Because despite, and this is really interesting, despite how powerful we think the institutions are or the REITs, they own a little bit less than we might expect. The numbers are a little inflated just because the U.S. is so large.
What are the numbers, by the way? Because this isn't the first time that this very thing has come up on this podcast, right? They represent a relatively small in the aggregate, countrywide, but also they're concentrated in certain areas. So there are parts of the country where they virtually have no presence.
Right, and it's sort of like a city issue. Your ma and pa developer is not going to develop a $1 billion skyscraper. There's an obvious presence of institutional developers and capital in cities, and it clusters there. And it's more obvious in a place like New York, where if you compare to Milwaukee, I'd say half of those assets are actually mid-market real estate developers who happen to land a bid, and they were able to build there, and they were meeting a market demand. And I think regionally is probably the most obvious identifier. The Midwest is very little institutional capital outside of Chicago. It's probably where most of it is aggregated. Outside of that, each city is their own. I don't have most recent numbers as of 2025, but it is an underwhelming number in terms of institutional capital. So you have this massive market of real estate developers who are out there chasing the American dream. They're entrepreneurs. They build up a firm. They start building buildings. Next thing they know, they have 500 million assets under management. They're kind of stuck, whether it's because they're micromanaging or they overhired or they don't have the capital to hire new people. It's a mess. Now, any company goes through that, but this is actually one of the areas where we identified this problem. And so not only are we just giving them software as a service, but we're giving them the service portion of what it actually takes to set up your company, set up your file systems and how you manage information about your properties or how you manage people and responsibilities, and do this correctly. And then you can make the most out of our platform. I mean, we're dealing with data, and data needs to be structured. You have documents. And so the first thing we say is you can buy a data room, and you can connect it to a language model, AI, ChatGPT, and ask it to solve your problems. Have you digitized any of your documents? Is any of it up to date? Is it actually verified, like went through a third-party audit, so that just because I put it in a data room doesn't mean it's any more relevant than if it were sitting in a filing cabinet? It's still out of date, useless, could be smudged or manipulated, whatever. So
good point.
We need to actually work with these developers and say, let's build you good systems, processes, and workflows. And if they develop good workflows, then we can identify the areas that can be automated through a platform like ours, whether it's recalling documentation so that they can perform their accounting duties, or the appraisal process. I think the appraisal process is probably a really good example of how terribly and how disorganized it can be done when someone goes through that, and the amount of money that is burned and the time that's lost. And you get through it all, and then you realize there's just big gaps, big gaping holes in this property, and that leads to contingency and discount. And even if you have a data room, if you're missing the most important information, or it's not relevant, or it's just speculation, you're still going to have the same discounts. And so part of why a platform like this helps is, so building is a data room. We help real estate developers extract, organize, verify, and then use data. And data lives in documents, generally your files or pictures or text messages and something like that. But we're bringing them on, and we can identify, you haven't uploaded this, or if you have, it's out of date, or the last time you uploaded it was 6 months ago. We can flag that, right? We very carefully structure this. Now we use Kobe standards. Most people don't know what Kobe is. It's kind of weird, but it's an outline of what, like, checkboxes. What are 100, 200 checkboxes that we need to tick for a compliant handover. It's more of a common in Europe, but our team decided that what they're looking for over in Europe happens to be decent enough to bring to the U.S. Same thing with BIM, but we'll get on that a little bit later.
Driven by data. Driven by technology. Driven by community development. Driven by the need to get results for your project. SM Graves Associates. Delivering real estate development to you, including project management and pre-development services with a keen focus on delivering community-oriented projects. We build profitable projects that respond to the needs of your neighborhood. Join the SMG family. Find us at smgravesassociates.com.
So here's some check boxes that need to be fulfilled according to our standards and those of institutions. We didn't make this up. We didn't crawl out of the woodwork and say, real estate developers need to fulfill these. No, this is what institutions are looking for if they were to refinance, or if you were to sell this, and if you were to meet GAAP, so SEC GAAP, ASC 820 codifications. If you want to be very specific about your fair market value, here's all the check boxes you need to fulfill. And most people, either they don't go through the consideration of all that, or they pay someone who does. And it takes up a bunch of time and money that way. Right. So we're helping them with the workflows. Start uploading this information. Start getting it in here, doing it frequently, or having someone verify that, make it accessible, and then we can start to make the magic happen.
Yeah, so how to keep a high quality to the data that you keep on hand, and having it on hand in the first place. On top of that, I can see the value in that, because if you're constantly, especially for those of us that are reinventing the wheel with every financial stack, you're always engaging with debt sources of financing. You're always looking for, new blood for equity investors, or you're moving money from one project over to the next project with certain equity investors that want to repeat with you, all of which requires, whatever sort of documentation you have on hand to be current, and to be, somebody or something, in this case, platform, helping you to stay current with changes to everything from SEC rulings to local law as it relates to your projects, ordinances, approvals, etc. Go ahead, Ryan. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, no. Well, so I was going to say that, so part of this is simply digitization, right? Like, there's the personnel process of how do we get this real world activity into a digital framework. But then the other part of it is recalling that information, having it in standardized formats, or having the key data from that information disseminated into these standardized formats, and then made easily accessible to not just the owner of that information, but the various parties, whether it's a regulatory body, a standards body, a lender, a co-developer, right? Like, that's where it gets really interesting is, not every project is a single developer necessarily. There's different interplays. And so how does your software begin to address those sort of multi-party factors that come into interfacing with this data, and keeping that cost of interface much more minimal than, we need a whole staff person just to chase all this down and dig it up out of the filing cabinet every time.
Right. Well, the issue with multi-parties is not that there's multiple parties. It's that you have multiple stubborn, fragmented, and siloed parties, and you have several ledgers, you have preferred methods, you have different software, and we all live in our own little worlds, and then the worlds collide. And this is multiplied for every additional party, company, and stakeholder involved. And this can become dozens on a big project, especially if you think about it across its full life cycle. And so the way that we approach this is going to the real estate developer, because ultimately the real estate developer calls the shots. They really do. They get to set the rules and the framework and the expectations for everyone along the line. And, well, because they're the sponsor of the projects, they're the one reeling in the capital and responsible for making it successful. So we go to them, and when you present a platform like this, you identify, well, here's the documents that you're going to need to upload. Here's the people that you're going to need to request those from. And it becomes a little bit self-evident over time. If we're in the pre-construction phase and you don't have any of your map information, you know that you have to go to your subcontractors. Or if you don't have assets information, have you gone to your architect? Do you have a digital twin? Do you have BIM? Was this implemented? Well, we highly recommend it, because that's going to make your life easier. And walking them through that process. And it's very consultative as opposed to just throwing software this way. And I admit this is unscalable in the long term unless I build up a big company with hundreds of people. But there's the artificial intelligence component. And this is where we think there's going to be a massive long-term competitive advantage, which is that you are consuming all of this knowledge and wisdom about processes and projects, and you're starting to train digital or AI agents that can then assist and step in as almost like fractional advisors that have been trained not just on your projects, but the highest quality of projects available to us. You can know that this AI agent was trained on verified data, that it's not just ChatGPT making a guess or hallucinating a response for you. It's those projects that train this are held to the same standard as you. But I digress. So the real estate developer is responsible for having those expectations. And this really narrows down the market a little bit further, because I can bring a data room product and tokenization and compliance engines and evaluation model with observable inputs to a real estate developer who has no interest in changing. They get by with the methods that they have. And this goes back to the culture conversation, which is that I've done this for 30 years. Who is building incorporated in 2024 telling me how I'm going to model my company? I make a lot of money. I don't need building. To be honest, I don't know how you fix that. So I just don't. So that's their attitude problem. I'm going to go to the real estate developer who says, yeah, I do want to be competitive and I want an edge in the market. I want to embrace technology to figure out how I can scale faster than those who came before me. And with less sweat, with less time, with less risk involved, I can be efficient. I can develop a brand that's known for innovation and progressive concepts, and they latch on to that. And I'm really happy that the developers that we've worked with in the beginning have that mentality. I really can't change the culture of a real estate development firm. We can encourage them to be data-driven and innovative, but I need them to have that instilled in them already before they come to us. And then the things that we talk about, whether it's Kobe, which is like, this is European, but it's going to make its way to the US, so you should listen. Or building information modeling, very European because it's regulated, versus you come to the US, it's really only used for infrastructure. But we say there's real value in keeping track of how your project is designed. You should really consider it. And those developers that are looking for new technologies or new processes and methods will say, yes, let me look into this. Oh, I understand now that there's an upfront technical cost, and I'm going to have to find an architect that understands BIM as opposed to just good old paper and pencil, design build process, but it's going to save me money. It can apply a premium to the assets, and maybe I can reuse that knowledge for every project that comes after. And it's the same thing with the data room. You're not just doing this for one outcome. You're doing this so that every following outcome builds off of the previous, and you just become better and better and better and more efficient.
Yeah, and you answered your own question there earlier, as far as like who, you go after the companies that will embrace this idea of change, but scale. I mean, if you're serious about scaling, and your idea of scaling is more what the three of us are talking about, you know what I mean? Which is in the case of developers over a wider geography, multiple projects. To me specifically, and I'll be interested in your thoughts on this. To me, a characteristic of a truly scalable developer is there's organization around their pipeline of physical locations, right? What's being built. It can also manifest itself in the choices made as to different technologies and materials and overall construction. Maybe we're using unique wall segments as opposed to traditional framing, or it could be innovative concrete, whatever. It could be digital or other types of technology that are installed in the facility. It could be a number of different things. It could be the financial model, right? But they're companies that show that they can do it consistently over multiple projects, and they're pretty mature about when and how they invest in technology, right? Like, when technology is, they have a process for actually investigating doing something new, finding the best solutions to something. They have an understanding in the first place for what it is they're trying to get out of doing something new, and not just saying, tech, go get us some tech. Like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean you want tech? Tech. Like, we're going to lose money. Like, you gotta, it's intentional. I hate to, that's overused these days, to be intentional, but it is exactly what it is. It's about being intentional and being informed when you're ready to actually implement a new technology. These to me are the characteristics of a developer that's taking scale and taking organization and taking the use of technologies and platforms like yours seriously. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that too.
Well, I think that this clashes with blockchain, because blockchain as a technology was introduced as technology. That's what it is. Come get it. Come use it. Get on chain. It's magical. And this left a lot of people disappointed. And I'm left to clean up the mess, where I have to have hard conversations with people and say, no, look, it's not a magical technology. It has very niche applications. And if you apply it correctly, if you know where, you know why, you're going to improve the operations of your company, and let us help you strategically implement it so that it doesn't become a cost or technical burden, and you learn it and then you scale with it. And I guess I'm sort of thankful that more people aren't talking about this, because it's given me a voice, and I can get on my soapbox and get on LinkedIn and say something contrarian and people highlight it. But it also means that when you're selling a product to the greater market, you're less interesting, less impressive. And I've had people say this. They'll say, well, I can go to this other platform that's promising me capital too. And they're going to tokenize it. They're going to give me a silver bullet. And I mean, even then, that's a willingness to adopt technology. But like you said, maybe it's over willingness or just naivete, where they'll just rush into it and not carefully implement it. There really is a happy medium, like all things. You need to find that equilibrium of adopting technology, but also being patient and doing so strategically, because big impactful technology is not just ChatGPT. I can jump into ChatGPT and it costs me $20 and there's no risk involved. But when you're building a technical stack, you're putting money into it and training people on this, it definitely needs to be done carefully. And that was the reality of blockchain. It wasn't just something that you slap on at the end. It is something Dr. Dennis Hill once told me, you don't just patch your way into blockchain. Like, it is an entirely new system that's coming about. And it's going to be the same thing with AI. You don't just patch on AI. AI lives off of data. If you don't have good data, then you're not going to have good AI. So it's about thoroughly integrating these technologies into your systems.
So I want to ask a question, and I want each of you to give an answer. Do we need, in order for more investment in real estate to come from tokenized currency, do we need, does the market for tokenization need to be legitimized, or is it more use of tokenization that's going to legitimize the marketplace for crypto? Am I even using the right words? I'm feeling so old.
Sort of, yeah. So
I'm feeling so Gen X right now. I've got to go hurry up and go watch the movie Say Anything or something. It's just, I just blew it. I blew it for you, Ryan, didn't I?
No. You're hitting on a key point because, yes, their legitimization is needed, but the pathway to legitimization is education on both sides of this technology, right? The people that don't know anything about it need to really learn it, right? But they need to learn it from really trusted sources. We need to have the conversation about standards and maturity, and where it is a good application and where it's a more frivolous application, because you can play with it everywhere, right? But it's not necessarily valuable in every aspect of everything. It's got key functions that have a benefit when used correctly. And then there's a lot of hype, and there's a lot of cash flow and ups and downs in the markets that are due to that hype. And just because somebody's in the industry and seems to think they know doesn't mean they really understand where it applies and where that rubber hits the road. And so, we talk about standards, and the BIMs and these other standards in building concepts, they create value for investors, whether it's a tokenized investor or a traditional investor. A well-communicated standard increases value because it decreases risk. And so similarly, a well-implemented blockchain solution or element to a solution legitimizes the project, reduces risk, increases transparency, really creates a reason for investors of whichever kind to get involved. But that education is required on all sides of the fence. And it's, it comes in fits and starts, I think. And as I think your adventure has shown over the past 4 or 5 years, Matt, that, it really is, there's a lot of market impact and network effect on the level of interest coming from both the traditional side and the tokenized investment side. And it's a sort of like stop and start of the educational process, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, the way that I interpret that start and stop is in alignment with sort of the summer and winter of crypto cycles, where an institution will announce that they've just adopted the technology, and suddenly the real estate developers rush and say, "Oh, I didn't realize BlackRock was in on this, and Blackstone. Tell me, how do I tokenize?" And then suddenly you see, what was the recent hack, BitBite or whatever, they had an issue, and then people pull back and say, "I knew that technology was too early. I'm glad I didn't buy into that." So you come with these ups and downs.
But it didn't work for tulip bulbs. It's not going to work for tokenization.
Right. But you can get past that roller coaster of emotion or mood swings, honestly, is sort of how you can look at it, that the industry goes through. If you just go back to the first principles, how do we break down the technology to what it's doing, where it fixes legacy issues? What is it supposed to do? All right, peer-to-peer transactions without needing to trust each other. We can engage. Okay, well, where can we apply this? In any instance of two parties that are transacting, whether it's a manufacturer and a buyer, or trade finance, importer and exporter, there's going to be different parties involved. And a blockchain removes that need to trust, because we know it's an immutable technology. And so whatever happens is truth rather than trust. You just return to those first principles. All right, now where can we apply this? Well, business is the transaction of something. Business by definition is two parties doing business with each other. So let's tackle this. Where's there a lot of money to be made? Where's a lot of money lost right now when business is not done right? Well, it could be real estate. It could be counterfeit goods in the supply chain. It could be insurance and insurance fraud. Let's just focus on those transactions and narrow it down. And I know that that's not exciting to people at all. Like we're not talking about Solana or Trump coin and all this BS that's out there. It's stuff that, but it's the stuff that actually moves money and makes money long term. 99% of people aren't making money on meme coins. So if that's what they want to invest into, their time and their money, then so be it. And then the 1%, not in any sort of like we're superior because we know to tackle the problems, but those who are willing to go against the grain and say let's talk about the unsexy issues and try to solve these. So your question about what legitimizes the industry, is it, or do you have to legitimize to grow, or is it the growth that legitimizes? Something about that word.
Yeah.
That makes this to be taken seriously. And I have to say it's a little bit of both, right? I mean, I know that this is a very lukewarm answer, sitting on the fence. And so that
it's only important if it's the truth. And in your mind, it's the truth. So go with it.
Yeah. And so I think in instances like an institution, large institution or large enterprise, whether it's the FDA looking at supply chain or JP Morgan or Citibank, they move very slowly, but then they'll come out with a large announcement that they use the technology correctly. And when they move, it's a $1 billion move. When something gets tokenized, it's $500 million worth of financial instruments. And so it's like nothing, and then suddenly massive jump. And that moves the industry forward. It builds trust. And so I think that's an indirect answer to the question. I've written it down and I've been trying to wrap my head around what the best answer is. If it's those big moves that legitimize that damn word, that makes things more legitimate or the growth, but it's a tango. It's a dance. That's really what it is. And you need a back and forth between the people, the use cases, the adoption, and we're just kind of each navigating. And I don't think there's going to be any sort of obvious point that the technology is adopted or that it's mainstream the same way the internet was not. We started putting it in our households and then people were Skyping, and now maybe COVID was an inflection point. I don't know if there's going to be a COVID for tokenization where we're like, oh, we're all Zooming all day, every day. This is what we do now because of COVID. But obviously this is natural mainstream for us to host a podcast or to do business on video calls, when maybe 6 years ago is kind of unprecedented. And then before that, even less so. It was just a very gradual until you don't even know the difference. You're going to say, where did the years go? And I think it's the same thing for tokenization.
I just got to point out, since you said that Entertain Live has been around for 7 years, and my first go-to was streaming these conversations live with founders like yourself. And to your point, it's sometimes pretty lonely being those first movers. And so it's interesting watching the ups and downs and the fits and starts of the learning process, that legitimization of anything new. And I remember working in a finance office, and was part of a company that had a couple business units, and my office had gone through a digital transformation process where we had not only changed and added some tools, but we hired a new individual as part of the whole plan of incorporating this tool set, because we knew you just had to start somebody from scratch. You couldn't just go tell somebody who's been doing it for 10 years, hey, now you got to do it different. It just didn't work. Even if they're employees and they're supposed to do what they're told, like, it just doesn't go well. But if you can say, no, you keep doing what you do, we're just going to add this person, they're going to do this other thing. And then you do it. And it took a while, but it was 2 years into it before I got a call from the comptroller of our other business unit, who was, sort of feigning anger as I pick up the phone, telling me, hey, Ryan, what the heck's going on over here? so-and-so is his counterpart for our unit was done a job in 4 hours that took him 2 days. Right. And it was just a matter of, we had digitized. They were able to go do a search for a keyword or a key number, find what they were looking for, do it all, sit at their desks. Granted it was 4 hours, but they got it done. Whereas he was out there in the filing cabinets, pulling the files, digging it out, going to put it back, and just going through that grind. And that's just the process, right? Like, that's an analogy for like every new thing. It doesn't even have to be technology. Like, a new change to a process that makes things more efficient, more effective, can be very much resisted by the group. And making that change can be hard and initially painful and require patience to see the results. But at the end of the day, I saw results all the time because people would come ask me for things because I could find them in 30 seconds, as opposed to really asking any of the other people in the office who would go digging into a file cabinet. And so it's been interesting and enlightening, kind of seeing that experience repeat itself as I look at other things happening in the market.
Folks that are used to the Mad Men way to run a business, like, what happened to the 40 admins that used to sit out in the secretary's pool typing up my shit? That doesn't exist anymore, bro, which means you've got to be at least good enough to write your own emails.
Yeah. So, hey, we want to, keep this listenably not too long.
Yes, we do.
So, Matt, really appreciate having you on, and really good to connect with you again. Curious, just to drop any key points of anybody that wants to go learn more, whether they're an investor, developer, just a curious individual that wants to learn more about Building Inc. Where can they find you and learn more?
Yeah, we've made it really simple to find Building. You can go to building.inc and you will find our website. You'll find some of our services that we're offering, our case studies or use cases, really. And I highly recommend digging into those. It just talks about how better data organization is good for your organization and how this sets you up for success in the wave of technology that's coming. And not to drag us on a tangent, but Ryan, one of the things that I was going to mention about new technology is that we can't frame it as a revolution. And I stay away from that word. You see it all the time on LinkedIn. It catches people's attention. They say, this is revolutionary. Everything is changing and transforming. And that's where you're going to get the most resistance. You have to let the results do the talking. And you say, yeah, this was more efficient. What took me 2 days took 4 hours. And people are going to say, oh, that's cool. I'm going to use that. And it just becomes commonplace in that way. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so if you do search me up, Matthew Schneider, you'll see my blue profile picture and a big smiling face. I put out a decent amount of content about data, AI, tokenization, things that are happening, but the real use cases and why people should care about it, not just any sort of hype. Certainly, real estate developers, let's start a conversation. Let's figure out if this is a technology that can be implemented into your portfolio, whether it's a new development, you're starting from the ground up, and those are the easiest, by the way. Nothing's gone wrong yet.
Don't I know that?
Or it's an as-built, where it's been up and running for a few years. We can still help you backfill and catch up to speed. And I'm sure there's lots of value that we can add to you, your portfolio, and your properties.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much. For anybody listening, they can find this on the Are We Here Yet podcast, which will also be on the Interchain Live channel, as well as your podcasting with Code and Concrete, which we look forward to being on soon. So I'm going to stop recording, and thank you very much.
SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast is a production of M the Media Project and SM Graves Associates. Learn more at smgravesassociates.com.